The Obama White House illegally spied on investigative journalist Sharyl Attkisson.
I'm facing crippling fines, up to $800 a day for protecting my confidential sources.
I think it's interesting to hear people say, and I agree with this, that the government should not be intervening in news coverage, but in my experience at CBS, that happens every day.
Conspiracy theories.
Yeah, like your computer, you think your phone gets bugged, you believe, and things happen to your computer after you wrote stories critical of the government.
Right.
That's scary.
CBS News seized hundreds of pages of my reporting files, including confidential source information. I felt it was a journalistic rape.
When CBS let you go, was it around the time of you calling out the Trump administration or around the time that you were pursuing more of the Hunter Biden?
I was let go a few days after the special counsel Robert Hur report into President Biden's handling of classified information.
There are bad actors inside our agencies that will violate laws.
The Obama White House illegally spied on investigative journalist Sharyl Attkisson by allegedly hacking into her cell phone and computer to determine the identity of a confidential source. We also saw the Obama administration take an adversarial position regarding freedom of the press when it sought to silence anyone blowing the whistle on the federal government's waste and abuse by seizing the phone records of Associated Press reporters and editors who used source materials to write stories. Committee will be in order. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Ms. Catherine Herridge. Ms. Herridge is an award-winning journalist who most recently served as a senior investigative correspondent for CBS News from 2019 to 2024. Previously, she served as the chief intelligence correspondent for Fox News from 1996 to 2019. Ms. Mary Cavallaro. Ms. Cavallaro is the chief broadcast officer for the News and Broadcast Department at SAG-AFTRA, a position she has held since 2010. Ms. Cavallaro is responsible for overseeing the negotiation and administration of over 250 labor agreements with network and local broadcast employers nationwide. Ms. Sharyl Attkisson. Ms. Attkinson is a 5-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and a recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Award for Investigative Reporting. She has been a journalist for 30 years and is currently the managing editor and host of Full Measure. Ms. Nadine Farid Johnson. Ms. Farid Johnson is the policy director of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University. She previously worked at PEN America, the State Department, and in private practice as a patent litigator.
As you know, in February, I was held in contempt of court for refusing to disclose my confidential sources on a national security story. I think my current situation can help put the importance of the Press Act into context. One of our children recently asked me if I would go to jail, if we would lose our house, and if we would lose our family savings to protect my reporting sources. I wanted to answer that in this United States, where we say we value democracy and the role of a vibrant and free press, that it was impossible, but I could not offer that assurance. The Bipartisan Press Act, which came out of this House committee, would put an end to the sort of legal jeopardy that I have experienced firsthand in the federal courts. And without the legislation, more journalists will run the uncertainty of the contempt gauntlet in the future. This legislation will provide protections for every working journalist in the United States, now and for the next generation.
Our intelligence agencies have been working hand in hand with telecommunications firms for decades, with billions of dollars in dark contracts and secretive arrangements. They don't need to ask for permission to access journalist records or those of Congress or regular citizens. Current efforts to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act relate to this. There's a lengthy record of government surveillance abuses to be found in just the little we've been able to learn about. Intelligence officials have misled Congress about surveilling U.S. citizens, even spying on journalists and political figures, their staff and allies.
Herridge, do you know if CBS's actions were influenced by the government in any way?
Use your mic.
Pardon me. Congressman, I'm not someone who's known to offer speculation, so I can't really answer that question directly.
Okay, fair enough. But with all of the travail that you've been dragged through by the government, has anybody within the government been held accountable for these acts against you and your freedom?
Congressman, based on my experience, I feel that we're in a very dangerous place as journalists. I'm facing crippling fines, up to $800 a day for protecting my confidential sources. I'm fortunate that that has been stayed pending the appeal.
Who's responsible for that, though? I mean, who are the actors within the government that are waging war against the freedom of individual journalists like yourself to report the facts that the American people need to form their own opinions?
If you're referring to my particular case, I want to be respectful of the ongoing litigation. It's in front of the appellate court. I want to emphasize that I'm only a witness in that case.
Let me ask you this. Has anybody been held accountable for these acts against you?
No.
Okay, Ms. Attkinson, what's your experience?
Well, I think it's interesting to hear people say, and I agree with this, that the government should not be intervening in news coverage, but in my experience at CBS, that happens every day. Members of committees, heads of committees, members of Congress, and the White House call the Bureau in Washington, D.C., contacts that they have, editors and managers up in New York to try to shape our coverage.
Well, that I don't find particularly objectionable as long as there is no force or threat of force behind that. Do you find that to be the case? Or,
I don't know what was said. I
there...
just know they called. There's no physical force threatened, but there certainly is a great deal of pressure, weighing on the networks in terms of their coverage.
Well, what about government acts directly? Have you encountered such intimidation yourself directly from the government, or is that all kind of channeled through your employers?
Well, I felt a great deal of pressure channeled through my employers. I was told that certain stories weren't going to air because we were getting phone calls, and even though there was nothing wrong with the stories, let's just let it rest for a day. Let's pick it up another time. They're really mad this time. And there was no objection over the content of the story or the facts. It was they just, as I was told, they just didn't like it, or it was a story that they felt was unfavorable at times.
Ms. Johnson, in the Brandsburg case, the Supreme Court declined to recognize the First Amendment privilege for news gatherers. What is the source of Congress' authority to provide such a privilege by statute?
Congress is absolutely authorized under the Constitution to provide this privilege, to create legislation and promulgate legislation by statute to ensure that these rights are enshrined further into law. And in fact, my understanding is that in Brandsburg, the court invited Congress to do so. So we are really pleased that the House has acted in this regard, and we look forward to the Senate doing so as well.
How fundamental to reporting is the protection of your sources?
Congresswoman, I have not lost a night's sleep about my decision to protect my confidential sources. That is the core of who I am as a journalist. I am facing contempt fines because I am upholding the most basic principle of journalism. If you cannot offer a source a promise of confidentiality as a journalist, your toolbox is empty. No whistleblower is coming forward, no government official with evidence of misconduct or corruption. And what that means is that it interrupts the free flow of information to the public. And as we all recognized, journalism is about an informed electorate, which is the bedrock of our democracy. If you had asked me 37 years ago when I started working that I would be in the federal courts living a legal nightmare to protect my sources, I would never have believed it. I told you a story about my son. I'd like to finish it. At the end of the conversation, he said, "Mom, you do what it takes. I've got your back." And I thought, if a teenager understands how sacred this pledge is for every journalist, certainly Congress can pass the Press Act and codify these guarantees that will prevent cases like mine in the future.
Thank you for that. Do you think that the heavy-handed nature of these fines is to compel quick disclosure of sources and not give reporters a choice, a similar choice the way that you've exercised yours?
Congressman, just ask yourself, how many journalists can withstand fines, in my case, of $800 a day? Mine's being stayed pending the appeal. In another case you cited, it was $5,000 a day. These fines are designed that you have to disclose your sources. You have to burn them. And in a marketplace where we have this explosion in independent journalism and smaller outfits, they cannot withstand these fines. They cannot mount a costly and vigorous legal defense of the First Amendment. That is why I think this is such a dangerous time and why the Press Act can codify these guarantees.
One of the things that I've noticed in this committee and in my subcommittees is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle often overpromise and underdeliver. And we are told repeatedly that there are conspiracy theories. We have a government that is going after individual and private citizens. I mean, this is the narrative over and over and over again. And you know, as a new one to this committee, I'm always so disappointed when I feel like there's actually a lot that we agree on. And press freedoms and the Press Act is something that we were able to all come together on. And that's where our attention should be. Ms. Farid Johnson, could you explain to us what is jawboning? Can you explain that to us?
Yes, jawboning is the act of coercion by the government to an entity to get it to, well, in the case we've seen so far, to get it to change its positioning, programming, what have you, in terms of what it presents to the public.
Do you have concerns about congressional hearings such as this one, or statements that office holders make that could be intended to influence editorial decisions at news organizations?
News organizations are entitled to decide for themselves what subjects to cover, and the First Amendment protects the editorial decisions they make about their news coverage. It would be unconstitutional for any government official to attempt to coerce a news organization through legal threats or exercise of the state's coercive power.
Would you have been able to shed light on the federal government selling weapons, including grenade launchers and anti-aircraft weapons, to the Mexican drug cartels without guaranteeing confidentiality of your sources?
It would have been tough. There would have been something to report, but not what we ended up reporting.
And when you were reporting on the security lapses in the 2012 Benghazi embassy attack, do you think you would have been able to shed light on the federal government's failure to maintain embassy security without guaranteeing confidentiality of your sources?
Some of it, yes, but some of it, no.
Do you, like me, believe it's important for the American people to be informed of these things along with waste, fraud, and abuse by the federal government, and we should do what we can to ensure robust media scrutiny of those government officials?
Yes.
Even if that includes members of Congress?
Right.
Does the status quo where sources need to depend on a reporter and their outlet's financial tolerance or physical tolerance for contempt punishment equate to a functional, sensible system?
No, and one quick example, a lot of times a source will end up going on the record, which is preferable, but you can't begin the conversation many times if you can't start out by telling him as you begin to talk that he's not going to be identified yet.
Does the current system have a chilling effect on potential confidential sources and whistleblowers?
Yes.
Ms. Attkisson, where do we need to go with this?
One outstanding issue is regardless of what laws are passed, we know from the factual record that there are bad actors inside our agencies that will violate laws. So a law doesn't necessarily provide full protection. And number two, when a citizen tries to get redress for something like that in civil courts, as I'm doing, I found the federal government has inordinate protections, their own shield laws, I'll call them. They have immunity. We have to get permission from them, the alleged guilty party, to get depositions and information. And I think this is something that needs to be fixed by Congress, the broad immunity granted to people who may be doing wrong inside government.
And is there any detriment to the IE, I'm on another, on the AI, is there another detriment to the fact that AI exists amongst us?
I'll bet there is, but I'm not an expert on that.
I do think that it's a priority. I think the idea that this passed unanimously and there is bipartisan support should mean it's something that we should be able to move forward quickly and expeditiously.
We're going to do a deep dive on that. I want to just quickly finish, I think, with Ms. Attkinson.
Herridge. Yeah, Herridge.
I'm looking at Ms. Herridge.
Yes, thank you.
If you would.
Sure, thank you for the question. I agree with my colleagues. I think the imperative is to get the Press Act through the Senate and on the President's desk.
Ms. Attkinson, you wrote stories critical of the Obama administration. Is that accurate?
Yes, but may I point out, it wasn't put in a political light, and there were also stories that some would consider critical of the Bush administration.
Well, let's say it this way. You wrote stories critical of the government.
Yes.
Yeah. And you factually reported. And then you did on Fast and Furious, you did on Benghazi and other issues.
Yes.
And even before, as you said, on the Bush administration. And then strange things started happening to you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like your computer, you think your phone gets bugged, you believe, and things happen to your computer after you wrote stories critical of the government.
Right.
That's scary, right?
Yeah, it's not a
frighten
comfortable
everybody.
feeling, right?
Ms. Herridge, you wrote stories critical of the Biden administration. Is that true?
That's fair.
I mean, you wrote a number of things about the laptop issue, about Hunter Biden, all kinds of things. You wrote critical of the Biden family, the Biden business operation, the Biden brand, and all that stuff.
Congressman, I reported out the facts of the story.
You sure did.
I
You
called
sure
balls and
did. You
strikes.
reported the facts. And then CBS fired you. Is that right?
My position was terminated.
Yeah. And you're an award-winning journalist. How long did you work at CBS?
I worked at CBS News for 4.5 years. During that period, we won major awards. I was part of an Emmy-winning team. I was nominated for Investigative Emmys. I think the most important projects were projects that drove legislation here on the Hill that positively impacted 1 million veterans.
So award-winning journalist, won all kinds of awards, had worked there almost 5 years, had extensive experience at a different major network prior to that, where you were also an award-winning journalist, done all kinds of reporting critical of the government there as well, and then you get fired. But it's worse than that, isn't it? Because they didn't just fire you. What else did they do?
On February 13th, when I was told on a Zoom call that my employment was terminated, I was locked out of my emails and I was locked out of the office. CBS News seized hundreds of pages of my reporting files, including confidential source information.
And that's not normal, is it?
No, that's not my experience in the other 2 networks that I've worked at or with my colleagues at CBS News. When the network of Walter Cronkite seizes your reporting files, including confidential source information, that is an attack on investigative journalism.
Yes, it sure is. So I'm just trying to, it seems to me there's a pattern developing here. You're critical of the government, Ms. Attkinson situation, and shazam, they start doing all kinds of strange things to your phone line, to your computer. You're critical of the government at a major news organization, and you're an award-winning journalist. You've been there 5 years, you get fired. But it's not just you got fired. In fact, we can, maybe there's nothing to that. But what we do know is they seized your documents. That's scary as well. And you talk about a chilling effect on the First Amendment. I don't know how it could be more chilling. Now, thank goodness the lady sitting beside you, they stepped in, right? Because they're stepping in and helping. Them stepping in helped you get because you got your files back finally, didn't you?
I did get the files back. If I didn't have the support of SAG-AFTRA really publicly standing up for journalism, I don't believe that I would have received the files and they would have been returned. And I just want to be clear, Congressman, wherever you work, if this happened to you, it's an attack on free press, it's an attack on the First Amendment. It makes it more challenging for reporters to work in the future. That disrupts the free flow of information to the public. They call it journalism a profession for a reason, because it's about an informed electorate, and it's a cornerstone of our democracy. I can only speak for myself. When my records were seized, I felt it was a journalistic rape.
Ms. Cavallaro, have you ever seen that before, where when someone is leaving an employment at a major news organization, they seize their documents?
I can't say that SAG-AFTRA is familiar with every single case of termination or departure where...
I'm not asking that. I'm saying, have you ever seen anything like this?
I have no recollection of seeing...
Well, that should scare us, too.
And you mentioned Emmys, other awards. In other words, is there any indication of, negative conduct in carrying out your profession, right? I mean, you've been getting awards. Nothing would indicate that there was a failure to perform your duties, failure to do your job competently, correct?
Congressman, I think what you're asking me is whether I was terminated for poor performance. I don't believe that my record would reflect that. I don't know what factors the CBS News executives considered when they terminated my position. There was tension over the Hunter Biden reporting and the Biden administration, but I can't say for sure why I was let go.
And you mentioned that tension. You had been one of the reporters, certainly in what we might define as the mainstream media, that was focusing intently on the Hunter Biden laptop, on the various facts surrounding the Biden family and the flow of money and all of the things involved with that. Is that correct?
That is correct. For the full picture, though, I was also the reporter at CBS News who obtained the audio tape of former President Trump apparently bragging about the Iran classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and I also exposed how 50 soldiers were denied the Purple Heart under the Trump administration in an effort to de-escalate after a ballistic missile attack in Iran. I'm someone who calls balls and strikes, Congressman. I just follow the facts where they lead. That has always been my calling card.
And when CBS let you go, was it around the time of you calling out the Trump administration or around the time that you were pursuing more of the Hunter Biden?
I was let go a few days after the special counsel Robert Hur report into President Biden's handling of classified information.
In closing, could you just reiterate the extent of your belief of what this means for other journalists? And you alluded to before, smaller journalists without the protection of the bubble of the kind of corporate structure that you've got with Fox backing you up from your previous reporting.
I just don't think many journalists could withstand the threat of significant and crippling financial sanctions. They may not have a former employer or a current employer who's in a position to mount a vigorous and costly defense. I think it's a very dangerous period for journalism. The Press Act would close the legal gap in the system, this ambiguity that I've had to deal with for 2 years. And I want to emphasize, this is not about a single journalist. It's not about a single story. It's not about a single network. What happens in my case, the passage of the Press Act, is going to impact every journalist working in this room, and it's going to impact every journalist in the United States and for the next generation to come. If there's anything I can accomplish in my career as a journalist, it's going to be getting this over the finish line. I feel this with every core of my being.
When you're on air at CBS News, you're lending your ethic in your image to an organization that's decided to do something decidedly different. Is that not true?
Sir, I came to CBS News to do investigative reporting and to bring in diverse voices, and I did my best to do that. I can't explain all of the decisions of the executives. In some cases, I felt that they limited points of view and voices. I was uncomfortable with that because I think good journalism is about diverse voices.
I think professional, ethical journalists, and Ms. Attkinson, I haven't wanted to leave you out, but it's hard to pick one example and kind of go there. I have great respect for the struggles that your profession has, and I don't know how all of them get solved. I do believe we make progress in bits and pieces, but I also I do think that it is a great tragedy that big media have all they can trot out a Catherine Herridge, but everyone I think probably recognizes who's fair-minded where the overall trend has gone.
Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.